All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this month's edition of the Post and Courier Columbia's Beyond the Headlines. Today, I am, first of all, let me introduce myself, I guess. I'm managing editor here in Columbia, Andy Shain. I'm going to be moderating today's discussion, today's topic, which is on the 2021 South Carolina legislative session. We're here today with two veteran legislative Statehouse reporters that we have here working for us for the Post and Courier here in Columbia, Shaunna Adcox and Jamie Lovegrove. And before I let them introduce themselves, I just want to remind folks that at 6 o'clock today, the Post and Courier is hosting a Pints and Politics featuring Governor Henry McMaster. So you're going to want to sign up for that. I've put a URL to sign up to RSVP for that in the chat section. You can also find it on our Twitter feed, which I've also posted in the chat section. So please consider signing up for that. First, I'm going to go ahead and let our panelists introduce themselves. We're going to start off with Shaunna Adcox.
Okay, well, I am a Barnwell County native and Winthrop grad. I've worked in newspapers in Sherrill, Fort Mill, Rock Hill, of course, Charleston. Spent 3 years in Albany, New York, and have lived in Columbia since 2005. When I started covering the Statehouse for the Associated Press, I rejoined the Post and Courier 3.5 years ago as part of this larger team. Jamie?
Hi, I'm Jamie Lovegrove. I have been the Post and Courier and in Columbia for about 4 years now. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and worked for the Dallas Morning News from Washington, D.C., covering the Texas congressional delegation, and also in Austin, the Texas Tribune, covering the Texas Statehouse before moving here.
Great. Well, again, guys, thanks for taking time off of obviously your busy schedules today to do this. Not because I'm your boss and I asked you to do this, but obviously also help our readers understand a little bit of what's happening in the session. And speaking of which, I want to thank our readers for some great questions. Most of this session's going to be your questions. I only have a couple for these guys. And first of all, I just do want to say that they're going to put their email addresses and their Twitter handles in the chat section. So if you want to reach out to them or you want to follow them on Twitter, please do. I'm going to start off with my first question, and I'm going to ask Shaunna, I guess, to kick it off. Is really what has happened so far in the session? We're about almost 3 months in at this point, well over 2 months in. So tell us a little bit about, give us a couple of highlights from your point of view from the session, and then Jamie, why don't you take a couple of things that have happened so far?
Well, I've spent most of this session covering the vaccine rollout, which legislators have not been too happy about, to put it mildly. They've made that abundantly clear in legislative hearings. They debated a lot last month about whether to prioritize teachers and eligibility. Ultimately, that was solved when teachers were made eligible along with most of the adults in this state. 3.7 million South Carolinians became eligible at the same time. The budget was passed earlier this week by the House. That's just the beginning of that process. Other things that the Senate has done is confirm directors of agencies for the Department of Public Safety and DHEC, which has spent the bulk of this pandemic without a permanent director. And the other things they've done in terms of the vaccine rollout is passed a law that allocated about $200 million additional for the vaccines, for everything from security, renting spaces, staffing, anything that's necessary to get that vaccine out. And it also mandated that the DHEC distribute the vaccines on a regional basis to try to fairly get it to the rural areas. And I'll let Jamie talk about abortion, guns, some of the social issues.
Before Jamie talks about those real quick, let me just ask you this. What does it mean that DHEC hasn't had a permanent director during the pandemic? What kind of impact has that had, would you say?
Well, they had a director, but it was their chief attorney who's been their interim director on and off several times. And, there's been a lot of criticism from the legislature and others that they have not been very organized in this rollout and the testing last year. There's been sort of a lack of leadership, according to a lot of people. Now DHEC will say differently, but with this new director who was not named until December and then confirmed just last month, he does represent the first medical director of the agency in 35 years. So there's some hope that he will present a more organized response to this.
Sounds good. Sounds fair. Jamie, what would have been some of the highlights that you've covered in the session so far since it started in early January?
Yeah, so I've been covering a lot of some of these social issues that have come up, sort of culture war-like issues that have really dominated parts of the session. The big overarching theme of the session is that Republicans have expanded their majorities in both chambers, but perhaps most significantly in the Senate, where there are now 30 Republicans and 16 Democrats. And as a result, they've been able to push through some of the more controversial partisan issues that they were not able to push through in past years. So the one that has probably grabbed the most attention has been the so-called fetal heartbeat abortion ban, which bans most abortions in South Carolina. Would ban abortions after around 6 weeks of pregnancy, which about 55 to 60% of pregnancies or abortions in South Carolina are after that point. That's now held up in the courts as both supporters and opponents knew it would be. A preliminary injunction was granted on Friday. And so now as that case kind of winds through the legal process, it will not take effect. The goal that supporters said during that debate is ultimately to get that case to the Supreme Court in the hopes that South Carolina will be at the front lines of overturning Roe v. Wade, the landmark 1973 decision that found women have a constitutional right to abortion access before viability. So that was a huge issue at the beginning of the session. Since they were able to get that off the chopping block in January, really, or at least in February in the House, they moved on to guns, which is another issue that they have been. The Republicans have been pushing for a number of years, but without success. They this year were able to pass an open carry bill out of the House. And now the question is whether or not the Senate will take it up. It's a little unclear at this point. Senate Judiciary Chairman Luke Rankin was pretty non-committal about whether or not his committee would even consider the bill. But that has been another big push of some of the conservative lawmakers this session.
Well, sounds like it's been a busy get-go. I know sometimes it takes things maybe a little bit to get started with a session, especially the first year of a 2-year session. So they've really been seemingly putting the gas on some things. Now we have obviously the tail end of the session that runs through May. Obviously might be a little overtime after that. Pick one or two things that you think are going to probably be done or trying to get done before the session ends in May, besides the budget, of course. Go ahead, Jamie. Why don't you start us off?
Sure. Well, one that I'm watching for and has really just struggled to break through on the House calendar because of how much has been going on, but has already passed the Senate, is a bill to sort of fix the death penalty in South Carolina. So under current law in South Carolina, death row inmates, people who are sentenced to the death penalty, get to choose their method of execution between either a lethal injection or the electric chair. The problem has been that for quite a few years now, South Carolina and many other states have not been able to obtain lethal injection drugs because the pharmaceutical companies don't want to provide drugs that are going to be used in executions. And so what they have tried to do for a number of years now, but it seems like they may finally get it across the finish line this year, is make it so that if the lethal injection drugs are not available, then the inmates have to be executed by the electric chair, even if they've chosen the lethal injection drugs. A little wrinkle that was added onto this debate in the Senate that made it even more headline grabbing was the fact that they added a third option, which was the firing squad. Senator Greg Hembry and Senator Dick Harpootlian, who was a prosecutor, has sent people to death row in the past, is a Democrat, argued that the firing squad is actually more humane than the electric chair, that it's an instantaneous death whereas it might not be in some cases on the electric chair. And they pointed to Utah, which has done this successfully. That bill is now over on the House side and has passed through committee. That they have their own version of it without the firing squad. So what will be interesting to watch when it does come up is whether or not they add that into their version and can reach an agreement with the Senate on that. And then we may be back to executing inmates for the first time in quite a few years.
Sounds good. Shaunna, what is it something that you're looking for as the session heads into its final months?
Well, what they have to do is pass a budget. We're still operating on the 1920 budget because the legislature froze spending amid the pandemic. We never had a budget last year. And so that is their chief responsibility. It normally is. Like I said, the House passed a $10 billion spending package just this week, and all spending bills have to start in the House. However, this is more of a rough draft than normal. Legislators are waiting on what we call the BEA, the state's revenue forecaster, to come up with an update in April to see if we could add a lot more money, honestly. They're also trying to figure out how much we're going to get from the federal law that just passed Congress and how they can spend it. They would like to use some of the money for small business grants, for example, but they're not sure they can. They want to make sure that they use it in a way that doesn't require South Carolina to pay the money back in the end. So the budget debate moves to the Senate, but no matter what, the House has promised to craft its own proposal probably sometime in May, and that's going to dominate a lot of time.
All right. Well, sounds like a lot of work to go left in the session. So as I said, when people registered, we asked if you had any questions, and boy, did you have questions. We have a lot of them, but I also wanted to say that there is an area on here where you can ask questions now that we'll try to get to as well. But I'm going to go ahead and hit some of the subject matters. I tended to kind of group them into subject matters, the questions that we got. And speaking of the budget, Shaunna, we'll go ahead and start off with you. The first, we had a couple of folks who brought up pay raises for state employees. Judy asks, does it appear that state workers will receive a raise in the upcoming budget other than teachers? And Judy asks, essentially, will there be pay raises for teachers, not just the step increases that have been already in there? So if you can sort of address what's happening with, or what's the talk about pay raises for state employees on this go around for Judy, for the two Judys, actually. I guess I didn't realize that they're both Judys.
All right, so I'll start with the short answer and then get more detailed. In terms of state employees, short answer is I think it's a very good chance that you're going to get a pay raise this year, even though there's nothing in the House budget currently. The only thing, well, back up, there are about $20 million in there for law enforcement agencies, the various state law enforcement agencies for officer pay, and there is the $50 million in there to cover K through 12 teacher step increases. But there's nothing if what we consider cost of living across the board for all agencies. However, Ways and Means Chairman Merle Smith has said repeatedly, including on the House floor from the podium Tuesday, that if those revenue projections are as good as we think they're going to be, then there will be an across the board pay raise for state employees. And he specified, as Gilda Cobb-Hunter was very much stressing, that it was going to be a pay raise and not just a one-time state bonus, which they've done several times in the past. Speaking of Cobb-Hunter, she is insisting on at least a 4% raise. That would be unusually high. In the last decade, the legislature has given a maximum of 3.25% across the board. That happened in 2016. But I think the amount, you're probably not going to know until June, but I do think it's a very good chance.
Okay.
When
do those new fiscal numbers come out? The ones that you're saying they're going to base this on?
The Board of Economic Advisors has a meeting in April. And they have said in the past that revenue projections look good, but because of the climate we're in, they've not wanted to officially make any sort of adjustments yet.
All right. Well, switching gears, this one is to you, Jamie, on some of the things that you've written about. I'm sorry. If I cut you off, I apologize, Shaunna. Go ahead.
Well, and specifically on teachers,
yes,
I understand.
please answer that. That's been a big interest.
Right. So state employees and teachers are paid completely different in the budget. Whatever they do for state employees doesn't translate to teachers. Like I said, there is $50 million in there for another step increase, but I understand teachers, that's a contractual obligation. They don't consider a raise. I honestly don't think that there's going to be anything beyond that in this year's budget. I mean, last year, before the pandemic, the legislature, the governor was pretty much in agreement that teachers would get each teacher would get a $3,000 boost, which would have cost about $212 million and represented the biggest single boost for teacher pay ever in state history. But then the pandemic happened. And I don't expect, they do want to revisit that, but it's not going to be this year.
And again, yes, it's obviously it's an unknown year how quickly we're going to come back from all of this at the moment. So as I said, to switch gears, Jamie, to some things that you've touched on in your coverage of the session so far. I would sort of put this under an LGBTQ heading, but the first question from Ray was regarding this was: is South Carolina going to pass a hate crimes bill with or without LGBTQ coverage? And Patrick was asking, or what are some of the actions the legislature might take regarding LGBTQ rights this session, which I think kind of leads into some of the transgender athletic participation, as well as a new bill that's come out regarding procedures on minors. So if you could address first the hate crimes, what's going on with that, and then maybe quickly go into some of the other issues that go into LGBTQ issues.
Yeah, so the hate crimes bill is now on to the House floor. It has advanced out of the House Judiciary Committee. So they will need to pass it by the end of the first week of April to get it over to the Senate in time if they want it to happen this session, which I'd say there is a chance that it could happen this session. There was some, drama in the committee process in that in the subcommittee, when they first got it, they kind of stripped down the bill. They took out specific protections for sexual orientation or gender, which were two of the sort of protected classes that would be considered hate crimes under the bill, as in if you target someone because of their sexual orientation or because of their gender, that would be considered a hate crime in the original bill. They took that out in subcommittee. There was a big outcry, and so they added it back in the committee process, in the full committee. The reasoning at the time was that they wanted to make sure they could get a bill that would pass in a Republican-dominated legislature where that there may be a good number of members who want a fairly limited bill. We're already one of only 3 states that doesn't have any hate crimes bill at all on the books. So they went through that. They've added that back in now. We'll have to see what happens on the floor, assuming it comes up before crossover, and then we'll see what happens in the Senate. But as Andy mentioned, there have been other LGBTQ issues that have been that have come up in the legislature this session. One was this bill that would force student athletes, high school student athletes, to play on the team of their birth gender, and that came out of the subcommittee, and in a bit of a surprise move was killed in the full committee. I think there were a number of Republicans who were a little uneasy about this this measure, and there were quite a few businesses, and that has been one interesting element of both of these issues, is that the business community has gotten more involved on these, basically saying that it's a reflection of the state's values, and that's important in terms of the businesses that comes. They've been pushing the hate crimes bill. They were more resistant to this transgender bill. And then I guess the last one to mention is this one that has been unusual because it's been pushed by a Democrat and 25 plus Republicans as well, but one Democrat, Cesar McKnight, from Kingstree, who has been pushing this bill that would prevent minors, anyone under the age of 18, from either getting transgender surgery or puberty blockers, which is something that folks will do to delay a surgery until after they are 18, but will delay puberty so that they don't have to go through puberty before they turn 18. he went on Tucker Carlson the other night on Fox News, which was a rare thing to see from a South Carolina Democrat. He's been getting a lot of pushback from his own party. The South Carolina Democratic Party actually passed a formal condemnation in their executive committee of this bill. So there has been certainly a lot of attention around sexual orientation and gender issues in general this session.
To say it certainly has been a real push button issue this year for sure. Another push button issue, and again coming back at you, Jamie, has been of course changes with elections. We had a couple questions related to that. John asks, will there be any push in the legislature to seek to pass more stringent voter laws, such as what we're seeing in Georgia? And Elaine asks, what actions are being considered taking place to her question is to suppress the vote in South Carolina. But in general, what is South Carolina considering, and how does it differ than what we're seeing in other states?
That has been interesting is that we have not seen what we have seen in some other states like Georgia, where there has been this raft of bills to crack down on early voting or crack down on absentee voting, limit the ability to vote in any way. We really haven't seen any of that at all in South Carolina. I have a few theories about why that might be. One is that, Georgia Republicans just lost 2 U.S. Senate seats. They lost a statewide election. They are much more worried about their state going blue than South Carolina Republicans are. South Carolina Republicans feel pretty comfortable at this point, especially after the 2020 elections. So they probably feel like they have less of a need to do anything, to put their fingers on the scale at this point. What they have been doing, which could become interesting down the line, is the House Speaker introduced a bill that would basically give the state election commission much more authority over the process, whereas historically it's been largely handled at the county level. It wouldn't do anything beyond that. It would not tell the state election commission to do anything other than it would give them the power to sort of standardize the election process statewide in all 46 counties. But you could see, and this is something the Democrats did bring up during the debate, you could see down the line Republicans using this greater authority at the state level on a commission that is 4 Republicans and 1 Democrat, using that authority to then try to crack down in some of the ways that we've seen in states like Georgia and states like Iowa. So at the moment, the House has passed the Speaker's bill to give the state election commission more power. The Senate has not really expressed much interest at all in that bill. Senator Campson from down in Charleston has been pushing a bill that would leave the authority at the counties, but would give the Senate a role in the confirmation process for election commissioners. So a much less substantial measure. I would not be surprised if this ends up being the type of issue that in the last week or so of the session becomes a piece of leverage between the House and the Senate, because it's clearly something that the House Speaker cares deeply about. It's his own bill. It's an issue that he really wanted to take on this session, and the Senate has kind of balked at that. So it will be interesting to see what happens. But the answer to the question in terms of whether or not we've had sort of a similar raft of election-related legislation to other states is no, we have not.
Well, let's continue on with the really hot button issues nationally that are playing a role here in South Carolina with the session. Shaunna, we obviously we probably couldn't go without talking about the legislature without mentioning somehow monuments and what's happening with those. Susan asks, will the South Carolina legislature stand up against cancel culture, removing historical statues, changing the names of buildings, etc.? So, where are we in this idea that about things with what's known as the Heritage Act, the act that helps kind of preserve what we have in the way of historic monuments and public places? What has been any movement or any legislation that's going on out there?
Well, for a bit of modern South Carolina history on what the Heritage Act is, it is a very unique law to South Carolina that ostensibly anyway protects our buildings and monuments and street names and all that other stuff in a way that other states don't. It was passed as part of the 2000 compromise that moved the Confederate flag off the Statehouse dome to then the Statehouse grounds. And it says that the legislature has to give approval for changing any of those things, removing those things. And it specifically says you need 2/3 majority, even though last year our Attorney General said that, while the legislature can require their approval, that 2/3 majority is likely unconstitutional. And that, as many people may know, happened after the John C. Calhoun statue was removed from Charleston Park, which was in a little loophole because it was on private property instead of public property, and the Heritage Act refers to public property. There's a group of Republicans who want to strengthen the Heritage Act, who want to, because they say there's no teeth in it, to say that if there is a community that does those things you've been seeing in other places, that they would remove state aid, what we call the local government fund that goes to cities and counties, and possibly even charge any elected official who votes to do such with a misconduct in office charge. Now, while that's been proposed, I don't see it happening. On the other side, Clemson, USC, Winthrop, their boards have taken votes to ask the legislature to allow them to make changes to buildings, to the names. Don't see that happening either. But the only time in recent history that the legislature has even been willing to go there has been after the Emmanuel 9 shooting, when the legislature voted to take that Confederate flag off Statehouse grounds altogether and send it to a museum. But soon after that vote, House Speaker Jay Lucas made it abundantly clear that he was, as long as he is Speaker, the House will never, ever debate those sorts of issues again. He's still Speaker. And so I don't see anything happening that way. I don't think really the legislature wants to go there. And in the meantime, until something is challenged and there's some sort of court ruling, they feel things are pretty much protected here as a whole.
All right. It doesn't sound like much is going to change on that front anytime soon. The last question, I have sort of a grouping of questions together. I want each of you to answer, and it basically, I think, sort of deals with what you mentioned earlier, Jamie, at one point, which is the fact that the GOP has grown in dominance in the state house. Lisa asks, is the current state of the SC legislature considered a supermajority for the Republican Party? And Gwendolyn was asking about, what does this mean for redistricting? So if, each of you want to answer a little bit about just what it means that Republicans won more seats in the Senate and the House, and what has that done within the legislature? What kind of bills are getting through or could get through? And also, what will that mean for redistricting? What's the schedule that we know of at this point for it?
So in terms of supermajority, that's 2/3. And both chambers picked up Republican seats. They both have their biggest GOP majority ever in state history. So the Senate picked up 3 seats. The House picked up 2 in the election, in the November election itself. But because of a special election earlier in the year that did flip a seat from red to blue, officially for the year, they just added 1. But that does give the House a 38 seat advantage in terms of Republicans, and the Senate 14 seats, which falls just shy of the 2/3. I think there maybe 1 member in each chamber would make the difference. And so it's not officially 2/3 majority. However, if you're talking about a veto, overriding a veto takes a 2/3 majority of members voting and present. So on any given day, for any given veto vote, they could have a supermajority.
Jimmy, talk about redistricting.
Yeah, I mean, I would just, the one last thing I would just add on Sean's point is it doesn't really, because of the fact that we have a governor from the same party as the majorities in both chamber, it's pretty rare that you have an issue that is going to require a supermajority in South Carolina.
Unless it's a gas tax bill or something like
that. In terms of redistricting, so that was something we expected to be spending a lot of time on, probably right around April, and is now going to be much later in the year because of these delays in the census data coming into the state. This has been an issue all over the country. It now looks like it's probably going to be sometime closer to September or later, and so it is going to be a much later process. I guess on the bright side, it means that they've been able to actually have sort of a full legislative session focused on the issues at the beginning There were some lawmakers who were worried basically they were going to have until March and then everything was going to get thrown out of the window and focus was going to be on redistricting. So they've been able to deal with a number of other issues while waiting for this, but it does mean they're going to have to move pretty quickly once this data does come in order to make sure that they don't have to push back filing dates for the primaries, which are generally in June. And so, that will be, and of course, to answer the broader question about redistricting too, it is going to be incredibly important when it does start happening. It could not be coming at a better time for Republicans in a lot of ways because of the fact that they have these historically large majorities in both the Senate and the House. But you have Democrats who are raring to go on that fight. Senator Harpootlian, the Democrat from Columbia, basically ran for office exclusively for this. He has dealt with a number of other issues over the years, but he has been very clear that he ran for office because he wanted to be in the room when the redistricting process began so that he could try to push for fairer maps. And so, there will be a lot of attention when that starts happening, but it's now not going to be for quite a number of months.
All right. Well, and again, obviously, Senator Harpootlian, being a former state Democratic Party chairman, certainly has experience and a huge stake in this and in trying to obviously preserve what part of blue remains in South Carolina, especially as you said, the Republican dominance in the legislature has grown. Jamie, Shaunna, I want to thank you for being with us today. And we didn't, there's some questions that were in the queue that we just weren't able to get to in the time we have allotted today. You have their email addresses. Please feel free to email them and ask them questions that you have. Obviously, please follow them on Twitter. They put it in the chat. Their Twitter handles, if you're not following them already, if you're not following them, you're missing a lot. So please follow them. Let's also remember that tonight at 6 o'clock, you can tune in to the Post and Courier's Pints and Politics interview with Henry McMaster, political editor Skylar Croft, and our own Jamie Lovegrove will be moderating that. Jamie, what are a couple of quick topics you're planning on bringing up with the governor?
We have a lot to talk to him about. Certainly, vaccine rollout is a huge focus right now, and we'll talk to him about that. We'll also try to get his view on a number of the legislative issues that we discussed today. Oftentimes we'll hear little sound bites from him about what he thinks about this bill or that bill, but hopefully we can get some longer answers out of him and know, whether or not there are any of these issues we talked about that he might not sign, because of course he still does have to sign these bills into law. Issues like hate crimes where it's a little unclear exactly where he stands. So we'll be pressing him on some of those, and I think it'll be a very interesting conversation.
And don't forget to find out what choice he prefers in the state flag design, option A or option B. That's always going to be a big one. And if again, the link is in the chat to sign up for that, or it'll be on the Post and Courier Columbia's Twitter feed. Actually, it should have posted already a reminder for that Pints and Politics tonight, actually coming here from Columbia. As the managing editor of the Columbia Newsroom, I always want to remind folks out there that, we are here in Columbia. Jamie and Shaunna are sitting at our office at Hardin and Gervais. You can hear the ambulances and the music and all the rest from the windows that they're sitting at. We're here. We have 11 journalists, actually 13 journalists here based in this capital city who cover local news, local business, opinion, sports, politics, you name it. We're covering it and doing a lot of that. So please follow us. And again, you can also look at the page that we have for Columbia news coverage. It's postandcourier.com/Columbia. If you want to get the latest on what we're doing, we also include all the Statehouse coverage there as well. That said, we also have a number of newsletters that we have here at the Post and Courier. We have 4 that come from the Columbia newsroom. We have a daily newsletter. We have a business newsletter. We have a weekend newsletter. We have a food newsletter. I guess I should say 5. Got my newsletter that goes out every week. But most importantly, the Post and Courier has a bunch of them, including Palmetto Politics, which these two write during the week. So I suggest getting that. Palmetto Politics is a great way to keep up with South Carolina politics in the state. So please subscribe to those. You can look for that on the newsletter tag up above at the top of our website. And finally, these guys cannot do their jobs without being paid. And the way they get paid is we get subscriptions. And so please, if you don't already subscribe to the Post and Courier, consider doing it. It's not very expensive. You get a lot of great news. You get to be the smart one as the barbecues and the parties ramp back up to know what's going on in South Carolina, everything from what's happening in Columbia or with the Gamecocks or in the Statehouse. So I really suggest you subscribe and let me, I want to thank everyone who has already. If you are a subscriber, thank you. And if you haven't subscribed already, let me thank you when you tell me that you have. With that, we will see you in a month here for Beyond the Headlines here in Columbia. And thank you for registering. Thank you for watching, and thank you for your questions. Have a good day, everyone.